Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Basha Skudrick, and I am the STEM Ops Executive Committee Director. It's a pleasure to have you all here today. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining. Please note that this event is going to be recorded, and as evidenced, we have over 150 viewers today, which demonstrates the interest and need of supporting the messages you'll be viewing and hearing today that are centered on access to STEM and education and in the workforce after the video. But before we begin watching the video, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Chris Etienne, who will be this evening's moderator. Chris is the program coordinator for the Prison Teaching Initiative at Princeton University. He is also a journalist and an African Studies scholar with a background in creative writing, journalism, and video production. You will see his skill sets at his best. He will be asking questions from the audience, and we are just so excited to have Chris lead this event with us today. Chris, I'll have you take it from here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I'm Christopher Etienne, and I actually work with the Prison Teaching Initiative out of Princeton University, and I also collaborate with STEM Ops. So what is STEM Ops? Because we're going to be throwing a lot of names out there, and this, we want to ensure that everybody gets an idea of the organizations, that have collaborated to launch this effort. So STEM Ops, which stands for STEM Opportunities in Prison Settings, is an alliance of higher education partner organizations committed to ensuring that STEM preparation during and post-incarceration is commonplace and successful. More specifically, STEM Ops' mission is to ensure all persons impacted by the carceral system are able and encouraged to pursue a culturally responsible and equitable high-quality STEM education and career. STEM Ops is funded by the National Science Foundation as a part of their Includes initiatives, which aims to expand access to STEM careers by underrepresented groups. Some of our partners include the Institute for Race and Research and Justice, RRJ, at Vanderbilt University, the Prison Teaching Initiative out of Princeton University, Prison to Professionals, also known as From Prison Cells to PhD, to PhDs, P2P, Operation Restoration, and the Education Development Center, EDC. These partners collaborate together to create equitable and inclusive approaches towards STEM education for justice impacted scholars. Could go to the next slide. One of the reasons that we gathered here today is because President Biden declared April to be a second chance month. And to be honest, I have an issue with this phrasing, but I'll kind of speak on that later. But anyway, the purpose of the grant that President Biden introduced in Second Chance Month, he wanted to kind of highlight Second Chance Pell Grants, right? The purpose of these grants is to highlight the critical importance of educational opportunities and careers for people impacted by the justice system. On April 17th, the National Science Foundation hosted a panel discussion where they invited justice impacted scholars, higher education and prison program directors, and formerly incarcerated STEM professionals on a stage to speak about the importance of Second Chance Pell, its impact on currently incarcerated students, and potential solutions for diversifying educational opportunities for our scholars during and post-incarceration. We could go to the next slide. The individuals who participated in this panel, it was moderator Kara Arunda, which is a senior reporter. She is a senior reporter for 12 Dive. And the panelists, when we start the video, you'll see the panelists. And from left to right, these panelists include Terrell Blanc, who's the executive director of FICGN, known as the Formerly Incarcerated College Graduate Network, Kirsten Tapp, former chief of staff, cybersecurity and infrastructure and infrastructure of security agency, Dr. Amy Lopez, who is the chief executive officer of Past the Edges Consulting and previous deputy director of the Department of Corrections, and Jessica Hickling, who is the chief technology officer of Unlock Labs, and finally Ken Oliver, who's the executive director of the Checker Foundation.
So some housekeeping notes. Please make sure that your mics are muted. We're going to collect questions through the chat. So if you hear anything throughout the video and you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat, and I will field them to Chris afterwards, and he'll be asking our panelists afterwards the questions that you have while you are watching this video. Please keep your video turned off. And if you have any technical difficulties, please send us a private chat and we're more than happy to help you. Next slide. During the video, as I mentioned, please use the chat window. Feel free to introduce yourselves and your organization, ask questions, discuss your ideas with others. We want this to be a very interactive event, so please network and ask away. Next slide. So before we start the video presentation, I do have one more plug. It's GlueUp. It's a platform that we use. It's a professional network of justice-involved people, of leaders, of allies. It's a platform where you can share information on events that you're working on, projects that you're working on. It's like a LinkedIn for professionals who, like all of us here tonight, believe in systems change and the importance of change. So if you do have a chance, I welcome you to become a free member, and I'll add that link in the chat box. But Chris, if there's anything else you'd like to include, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Basha. Like I would say that I know that when it came to a lot of the language associated with Second Chance Pell and just higher education and prison programs, myself, I was left out of the loop on a lot of things just because of the barrage of jargon often used, by different professionals and experts in these fields. And so I would say if you come across something that you don't understand or something that you feel would require further clarification, to just jot down some notes and just feel free to ask us, after this video ends. And yeah, and of course, join our GlueUp group, and we have just an abundance of experts there that you could also interact with and continue to have these conversations about how you can get involved, what does this jargon mean, and what these acronyms stand for as well. Yeah. So I think with that said, we'll get the video started.
So welcome to all our panelists. We have several focus areas we want to cover in our time together. So I'm just going to get right into it. And the first focal area first question I'd like to direct to Jessica, Kirsten, and Amy, and hopefully Ken and Terrell can add on. But with Pell reauthorization going into effect this fall, most developing programs will focus on humanities, as has been the norm for Second Chance Pell. Why should we focus on STEM in particular, and what does access to STEM mean for those inside, their families, for crime prevention, and for mental health?
So thank you for the question, and I would like to address this sort of experientially. So for myself, I went to prison at 16, which means I had a GED, no work history, no job skills, nothing to give anybody, nothing I can use when I came home 26 years later to say, please hire me. Now, no matter how much I wanted to succeed when I came home, if I didn't have some kind of credential that I acquired while I was incarcerated, my chances of success were very low. And so I was given the opportunity through partners that I work with now to gain a STEM skills, and specifically I learned to code while I was in prison. As a result, when I walked out of prison on a Friday, I was on a job on a Tuesday as a CTO of a tech nonprofit. You know, STEM was the deciding factor for me to hit the ground running. That was 15 months ago, and life is beautiful. And one of the things I'm proudest of, strangely, is last year when I paid my taxes, I paid $10,000 in tax back to the state, so I'm contributing. Conversely, one of the things that we do at Unlock Labs is help colleges provide access to education programs inside a prison. And one of the things that comes through our system is liberal arts degrees. I have nothing bad to say about liberal arts. So let me qualify that with that statement, because liberal arts are very important, especially if we want to train people to be leaders as they return to society. Liberal arts are specifically and have always been for training leaders of society, so they're important. But what I see is a lot of the folks who walk out with these liberal arts degrees can't translate that to the workforce. Now, they come home fully associates, even master's degrees in liberal arts, and eventually end up in our program so that we can give them some STEM training and they can hopefully get into the workforce. So I would say it's crucial to give people skills that are employable, and STEM skills are the ones that seem to translate the most.
I would say that one of the reasons you see liberal arts degrees in humanities is because it's low-hanging fruit for post-secondary. You don't have to ask to bring in equipment. You don't have to ask for the internet. You don't have to have tools. You don't have to have a computer. So you just have lecture, right? And so it's easier for post-secondary institutions to ask to have those kinds of programs. And they're really great. I mean, my undergrad degree is in theater, so I'm a big fan, right? My daughter's an art major, but I think that's why we see more of those. And the reason we need to be looking more at STEM is because that is where the employment gaps are. And so if you look in DC, for instance, you have a lot of construction. And so one of the things when I first came is doing that research to say where are the good jobs, and they're in telecommunications, and they're in cloud certification, and they're in those things, right? Because that's where the money is right now. And that's where the gaps are. So we should be encouraging higher ed to provide that kind of training and those kinds of courses. But it's just easier to do humanities.
It is always the interesting piece when people have trouble with technology, which I always do, so thank you.
Notice I changed mine on and it works. So I'm not the technology person.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here, and thanks to Eden for this event, and it's really an honor to be sitting on this panel with each of you and for what you've each achieved and where we are and working together. And interestingly, I think the location being here at the Building Museum represents something. I think one of the last times I was in here for an exhibit was on the St. Elizabeth's exhibit, which is the psychiatric hospital in DC that's converted now to the Department of Homeland Security where I work. And so there's an interesting kind of bookend about what we've done. But I think it's so important for creating ecosystem. And so when we're talking about community support and when we're talking about what we need to do in this system, it is very much about what are we building in the community. And STEM now, technology, is the underpinning of our infrastructure. It's the underpinning of how we learn. It is no longer something that is delegated to an IT department. It's not something that is in a basement with a computer. It is what we all do. If you reach into your bag or into your pocket, each of you has a cell phone. I'm 99% confident. You might have a flip phone, but you probably all have a cell phone. And you've got, a device at home. And so we are now all relying on this to connect. And to Amy's point, there's been such an inequity in how we are connecting communities and people. And one of the advantages that we have to teaching STEM is not just about employment, which is absolutely, STEM is critical to really every job you have. I actually push back a lot on the term cyber workforce, which is something that we're very focused on in the Department of Homeland Security at CISA, because we are all part of the cyber workforce. We all need to have some technology understanding. Doesn't mean we need to be engineers, but our ability to have aptitudes in this space can all be applied in this field. And we have to do a better job of creating the communities, not just in our high schools and colleges, but we've got to be doing this for our young children. If a student is getting an iPad in a public school to learn how to read, they should understand the technology behind it so that we're creating these opportunities for this technology education. And we also have to go to where the talent is. We can't expect talent to come to us. So from a federal government perspective, we're doing more to partner with vocational schools, to community colleges, to high schools. We don't need to have traditional degrees to start employing people in this space. And I think that is one of the huge advantages to STEM, is that this isn't about multiple years in a space. It's about skills and expertise that can be learned in various environments and in various situations. So we've got to be able to take this huge opportunity about STEM education and bring it to where we have such capable and the capacity of individuals to learn, which is in our justice system, and how we can revitalize and truly look at revamping and really doing so much more work investing in changing the justice system by educating individuals there through this opportunity and through this capability of STEM that we from the federal government have to do a better job at making available to everybody.
I would add to that it's a benefit for people who have a criminal history, because it doesn't always prohibit them from getting employment in those kinds of jobs.
And Ken and Terrell, do you want to add to why focus on STEM in particular?
Yeah, I think something I'd probably add to the conversation from a student perspective, or at least with the students in mind, because I can't necessarily say that all students who are incarcerated are thinking about their education in this way, at least on a grand scale. But I think it's about diversity. When you talk about Pell Grants being accessible to essentially any university that is accredited and qualifies to teach in prison settings, I think there is a such thing as like too much of a good thing possibly being bad. And in this case, we are talking about like the humanities and liberal arts, only in the sense that it doesn't add any diversity to the programs that's being offered on the inside. So as Jessica mentioned, like, no shade at liberal arts programs by any means, but if every college that went into the prison system is providing liberal arts programs, like what does that mean for the individuals that want to go into medicine or want to go into coding or anything like that? The same way we look at corrections departments and say like it's not all about welding and learn the sewing if you're talking about a women's facility. Like these are all areas that they, I guess, based on gender as well as the capabilities of incarcerated people, or at least what they believe incarcerated people are capable of doing. But it's, for me, I would love to see, second to a world without prisons, right? But if prisons are going to exist and education, higher education is going to be provided, I would love to see students being able to select which college they're going to attend while they're incarcerated, whether it's via, technology, or that if it's multiple colleges coming into a facility, being able to choose which major they're going to go into and graduate from. Like, that's where, and all of this is based on the fact that they're using Pell Grants, which they're now going to have like unlimited access to. So I'm limited to only going into the program that's coming into this facility with no chances of me possibly going to another prison that has another college program. Some people are just locked into this one opportunity, and if all of my Pell Grant usage is going to be exhausted by the time I leave here, that's a whole bunch of other like financial implications that I have in terms of borrowing or hopefully hustling to get some scholarships. So I think, again, going back to the question, you know, why does there need to be STEM? I think that those reasons and more is why we should have diverse education opportunities on the inside.
Very difficult to follow. All of these brilliant people here, so I'll double click on what everybody said here. Just add that if we can zoom out from it and understand the systemic issues that are precipitating this conversation.
Switch. My switch went off.
Let me make sure there it is, okay. So there's some systemic issues that I'd like to just bring up. One is low expectation when we're talking about humanities, and that is something that has preceded most people who arrive in prison to begin with. They come from circumstances and communities typically where there's a low expectation, especially when you talk about Black and brown communities. And two, understanding why these things are important, STEM and other types of education in prison. We need to understand what drives mass incarceration and recidivism. It's poverty. And so when we think about access to economic mobility, when we think about low expectation, these things are systemic issues and why there's a need for us to open the field and not have any expectations of all, especially lower expectations, and have high expectations of individuals. There's enough people out there now, thousands of people that are like the folks on this stage who are wildly successful in corporate America, in academia, in all sectors of society that came from a prison cell, right? So there's no longer the need to think that like people who are exiting prison need to put on an orange vest and go pick up stuff on the side of a freeway. There's no reason to think that the only thing that we're capable of learning is stuff about Greek mythology and Socrates and all of that type of stuff. I mean, I remember reading all of those books, and I also remember sitting in solitary confinement myself as I read David Thoreau and read Tolstoy and read Greek mythology and thinking like, none of this is going to make me a dime when I get out. Although I appreciated the knowledge. I'm a voracious reader and love knowledge, but I remember thinking about tech and watching what was happening in the marketplace in front of me. So I would read things about tech and business because I wanted to be able to hit the ground running with something that was going to be able to make me some money. As a middle-aged person getting out of prison, how was I going to take care of myself? How was I going to take care of my kids and my grandkids and sustain myself and keep myself out of a position to making desperate decisions, which is what my hope is for every single person that's ever been incarcerated, is that we can provide pathways to keep people from having to make choices that are very, very, very difficult when you don't know where you're going to sleep, when you don't know what you're going to eat or how you're going to pay for anything. That causes all of these symptoms that occur, from violence to substance abuse to, crime, to all different types of things. So I would just, say that it's a both and. It's a systemic issue, and then it's also an educational issue, and open up to technology as one of those spokes.
Can I just add one thing, because I think it's really important what's being said as far as what each of you is doing and leading, because when we talk about systemic barriers, when we look at the stereotypes pinned to individuals who've been incarcerated, to individuals with disabilities, to women, all these things, if you look at special ed programs and kids getting out of school, they're either put in, food services, or they're called, or flowers, it's the double F. And when you look at women, it's, talking about the sewing, it's these very systemic judgments that are made. And so the more opportunities we can provide to show that these are where capabilities lie, and how we create the momentum and the norm for this, the better we are. And given our environment right now, for all of the challenges that we have with the technology environment, the opportunities are greatest in this space. And so being able to create that visibility around those that are in it, so that we can create the momentum through the leadership of individuals who are showing the capability and the capacity, because I think we have failed so much in providing the diversity of educational opportunities to allow individuals to choose versus choosing for them.
Great insights to get this important conversation started. I want to go a little deeper now and talk about, what does technology equity mean, and what does that look like, and what is the value of providing full access to technology?
Helping you, get to where you need to, but at some point, if they don't have the capacity to put those resources into formerly incarcerated employees, at the end of the day, at some point, it becomes a burden for employers. And I know this because I've been doing interviews with employers and asking them, if I'm creating this professional development, program, what needs to go into this? What have you experienced with your formerly incarcerated employees? And like, where has it been challenges, whether that's, characteristics and strengths that, may take place in like communication. If it's written communication, like via email, then you're talking about like how to draft emails. But no matter the case, like more often than not, it was technology that came into place. And I think we often think about technology being like, supercomputers and carrying out, some really expensive machine. But no, basic software is technology. And I think if we're thinking about equity, because not everybody that comes into the prison system comes from like a poor background, whether urban or rural. You do have people who were well into their careers before they became incarcerated. And for those folks, they may be good on using the whole Microsoft suite. But the person that, is next door to them or sleep next to them, they probably came from a household where they didn't see any type of computer or any type of technology. So again, both of those individuals, whether they graduated prior to prison or, got their degree in prison, got their GED in prison, they both should be leaving with like a core set of competencies so that either one of them can compete for a job when they come home.
Or apply for one. Can't even do that without having the skills.
I would add to that, thank you for that, Terrell. I would add to that, from the tech side, I work for a tech company. And so tech equity means something very different to me now than what we've currently talked about, which is the access to education. But it is about the desegregation of access and opportunity. Tech in general has a terrible, terrible diversity problem, primarily due to the digital divide and things like access, lack of access, and lack of opportunity. And some of that comes from the stigmatization in our own community. I want to flag this from an educational perspective. Because we don't see opportunity, we tend to shy away from tech or higher education because we don't see that light of access on the other side from employers or from people who actually control the levers. And so for me, tech equity is about forcing, if we have to, tech companies, corporate America, because we live in a technology-based economy, which you flagged earlier, that's not going away anytime soon. In fact, it's going to get worse. I mean, there's reports out that say in 20 or 25 years, if we as a community, speaking Black and brown communities, aren't able to bridge the gap, we will be shut out of 90% of the jobs that are related to tech and the knowledge-based economy if we're not able to bridge the gap. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done on the other side to show people that there is opportunity. And one of the things that I love being involved with tech for, even though it's a lonely place, as a justice-impacted person, is going into prisons and showing my constituents, the community from which I sprung, that there is a pathway for them, that there's another way for them to access the middle-class economy and economic mobility with just a little bit of work and a little bit of guidance. We're providing pathways for them to get into the tech space. And I spend most of my time talking to tech companies about that type of change management. But there's a tremendous amount of work to be done. And I think that from a public perspective, there's a lot more that government policy can do to support businesses and vice versa with private-public partnerships to support the narrative change needed. Because we as a society created this mess kind of this status and stigma that attaches to people who have a criminal record. And so it's incumbent upon us as policymakers and businesses and people who control the strings in society to kind of unwind that a little bit and provide space. So I would add that from that side.
Great.
I would like to add a little bit to this as well. And you'll have to forgive me, I'm about 1.5 years removed from the law, so I may mess up a little bit of the details here. But Eden spoke at the beginning of this panel to the amount of our society that is of justice impacted in some ways. It's no small portion. A couple of years ago, the United States Supreme Court, being here in DC reminds me of this, took up a case of whether or not People who are convicted of specific offenses could be prohibited from accessing the internet or parts of the internet. And the conservative side of the court actually penned the opinion. And when they were done, they reached back 100, 150 years to First Amendment case law and had a conversation about today's Facebook and Twitter and other things that were being prohibited are the modern equivalent of the square. And you cannot, from a First Amendment standpoint, prevent people from that access because you were thereby excluding them from society. When we talk about digital equity, we are really talking about, are we excluding an entire portion, a large portion of our society from contributing to the very structure of society? So it's more than just, are we talking about jobs? Are we talking about, can you walk out the door and pick up a phone? We are really talking about the contributions of an entire portion of our society to the thought of our society and how we move forward. So I think it's definitely important when we talk about digital equity to remember we're talking about the very fabric of our society.
Just want to add on to that because I think to Jessica's point, it's about both access and input. And so it's accessing the technology, but it's also what we're putting into it because our technology is now kicking back to us how we're building our society. And we won't need to go down the artificial intelligence route, but if you're just tracking the Chat GPT and what automated and generative AI is doing, what we're putting in is what we're getting out. So if we're putting in biased, prejudiced information and data, we're going to get that back, but we're not going to get that back as a one-for-one. We're going to get that back in 100 times what we put it in. And so if we are truly looking at addressing the systemic challenges, we have to create and address what's going in. And, we were talking earlier about the pandemic and how that hit, children and all of that. And if you never, the technology equity hit the front page in this case because you were looking at reservations, you were looking at rural areas that had no equity. One of the things that we're trying to do in the federal government is giving grants to state and local communities for cybersecurity that is intended to invest in technology. But I think the real point that Ken made, which is so critical, is we have these and this is not a capitalist statement, but these wealthy technology companies that actually want to give their technology back in many ways. And government has to do a better job in this industry-government partnership of working with those technology companies to look at how do we build out that technology equity. Because it's not just about giving money, it's about identifying where that technology exists. And we're, through these grants that were apportioned by Congress and are being now delegated almost as federal emergency management grants as far as how they're getting to state and local communities, it's being able to address that. But we're not educated, I think, well enough at that local community level to understand where that technology can truly be taken advantage of, and that is in our justice system. And being able to look at every individual, we have this bias that we're making judgments on who can contribute to society. And that has impacted us so negatively, regardless of the constituent group, whether it's individuals who have been incarcerated, whether it's race, gender, whatever. If we could go in with the premise that everybody has something to offer and that everybody is valuable, and if we treated our system that way, then our ability to change the biases would be so much greater. We are a little bit running against the clock because of what we're creating with technology. So the need for technology equity, I think, has certainly never been greater. But working with industry and government's responsibility to play a role in this to make sure that that's happening at the local and community level is critical.
These answers lead perfectly into this next question, which is, what is the specific value or values of the directly impacted experience and diversity to the STEM disciplines, to national and local health and security, to crime prevention? And I'm even thinking of people's self-worth and confidence. Jessica, would you like to start us off with that?
Thank you, and I would hope that I can be a living example, maybe. So when I was on the inside, I saw two versions of approaching rehabilitation, reformation. There's a bunch of words for it. Some of them, almost all of them, are weighted in some ways. But at the end of the day, there was this approach of, we are going to create this thing, we being outsiders who are educated, who are going to create a solution and compel it onto a population to which there's no common method of communicating. And it's funny, you were talking about AI and what it kicks back to us, and it actually reminds me of a rather famous failure in the fields of AI, where folks decided that they would come up with a risk assessment utility that was AI driven, and it would determine how likely somebody was to commit a crime again. And it was horribly biased and horribly racist, because you did not stop to think, involve the people who are directly affected by the system. Take folks who are justice involved and have them contribute to the solution, and you'd be surprised. Those people who have lived experience can typically give the best value to a system. And I can just highlight a couple of examples that I've seen. One, when I was on the inside, the Missouri Department of Corrections decided they were going to do a victim empathy course. They sent people to California, they talked with people from OJC, they decided they come up with this curriculum. And they showed up in the prisons and said, we're going to teach people about understanding the impact of crime on victims. It went horrible. It lasted about a year. It had really no effect in the population, and at the end of the day, they couldn't get anybody to show up. So they were inclusive. They sat down and they approached some of us, and they said, wait a minute, what if we talk to you guys and say, maybe you can help us structure a curriculum in such a way that that there's a common method of communicating, there's an understanding, there's an experiential knowledge set that you bring to this problem. So we rewrote the curriculum for them in partnership with the Department of Corrections and Parents of Murdered Children and justice-involved individuals. We sat down collaboratively and created this program. It lasted for 20 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections and is considered to be one of the most successful programs in the department. And that's not STEM related, but the work we do now, the coding program that we teach in prisons in Missouri, was started on the inside by justice-involved individuals. So I would say this. People who are in justice involved come to the table with real lived experience. They can bring a knowledge set that you can't conjure up in a university or in a book or in a paper. And you have to include them in the conversation if you're ever going to make a solution to these problems.
I'd love to build on that. That was a great piece. I think that's to be said for diversity and inclusion in general. I think what's been lacking from the people that have controlled a lot of the levers in the economy and in business is understanding the fabric of America and their customer base. And so whether it's, a neurodiversity individual, a veteran, LGBTQ community, justice impacted, the more lenses you have at the table to solve for something, the chances are you're going to get a richer and better experience, whether that's product, whether that's marketing, whether that's advertising, whether that's engineering, or whatever. The data shows that the more people that you have at the table, the better your solution is going to be. Justice impacted people are one of those people that have a unique lived experience. I always like to use the example of my friend Larry Miller, who was at Nike, who did 10 years in a Philadelphia prison and went on to become the president of the Portland Trail Blazers. He was the chairman of the Jordan brand, took it from 140 million in sales to 4 billion in sales in 4 years. And, I often, Larry doesn't like to say it, but I like to say it. He's the case study for why every boardroom and C-suite in America should have someone like Larry Miller. He wasn't successful because he was black. He is black. He was successful because of his lived experience, the things that he saw growing up in West Philadelphia, the things that he saw in prison, the things that he saw when he graduated from Temple University with an accounting degree. That potpourri of experiences gave him a unique lens that saw something different than the old heads who came from Stanford and Yale that were on the Nike board. And he was able to do something with a product that they weren't able to do because of his different lived experience. So I think, there's numerous case studies from, brilliant women and brilliant people from all different types of communities that make those case studies. But we're one of the spokes in that wheel that need to be considered. And, I could point to 1,000 cases that show that we have a lot of value proposition to add to
So
every
ironically,
sector.
this is andragogy, right, as opposed to pedagogy. Andragogy is how adults learn, and adults learn best with relevancy. So whatever they're learning needs to be relevant to their life and hands-on in problem solving. And so when we talk about educating in carceral spaces and incarcerated students, and particularly with adults, why aren't we including them in all of the problem solving and what we're going to offer and how we're going to offer it?
like to add, because as we're looking at building out workforces in the federal government, we talk a lot about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility efforts and complements to how we're putting this together. And the premise, building off of what was said, which I think is so critical, is that, you know, in cybersecurity, where I sit right now, when we look at that workforce, I believe it's very much about problem solving and building solutions. And if you think about how to do that most effectively, we all benefit from diversity of perspective. And it's not just about a math or engineering. And an anecdote which feels a little bit simple given the experience and expertise in this group, but USAID, the United States Agency for International Development, we were working on something called a cyber moonshot for the federal government, which was securing the internet by 2030. I'll let you know how that's going. Not really that well. But looking at what a moonshot is, and so we brought someone in from USAID to talk about these grand challenges that the federal government has, which is, you know, what happens if an asteroid hits the United States. It's these big, big problems. But one of them was creating an Ebola suit for Africa and those communities that were impacted, and how do we get the healthcare workers in there safely. And talking about how do we design an Ebola suit. And they did this audition across the country where they just literally went into communities and said, we need people who can help us design this. So typically they were going after healthcare workers, and there was a woman who was adamant about being part of the team. Long story short, she ended up being a wedding dress designer, and the idea was that she understood breathability of fabric. She had to make the case for why she was relevant, and literally they looked at her and said, you know, you're a woman, you're fashion, like that's not what we want. And so they now tell this story as a means of explaining, you know, we have got to just get ourselves out of our own way in how we look at what we've done in the past. And, you know, I can't emphasize enough what Ken said about diversity of thinking. And as we open the aperture, the better we are. And that goes, again, to this idea that every individual has something to offer, so we have to be able to stretch our brains broader to see that and to create those opportunities, and also get out of our way about what we think are credentials. No one has had a linear path. When we think about, you know, what we each bring to the table, we can look at it as baggage or whatever. I would look at it as experience and life experience, and if we see that as opportunity, then we will open the aperture for communities and for problem solving. And whether it's in a boardroom or at a school or in some capacity, we are much better as a community and as a nation and as a world if we're looking at individuals that way.
And I want to bring it back to focusing on STEM. By asking who are the critical and perhaps unrealized stakeholders who need to be involved in bringing STEM education, STEM careers, and technology inside, and to ensure data is purposefully used, accessible, and presumes human dignity and assets. Ken or Terrell, do you want to get us started on that?
Well, I think we've all talked about the stakeholders here, but just to recap, I think, first of all, people in the community. I'm a big advocate for centering people and how it's going to affect their community when people get out of prison. They are not present in a lot of these conversations that happen at the correctional level, even though their tax dollars pay for what happens inside of our prison systems in America. So community stakeholders, obviously correctional staff, and I say that reticently, state government, federal government, and if it's the case of the federal system, businesses, which are often left out of these conversations. Prisons and mass incarceration is not good for business in America. It takes tax dollars away, it takes spending dollars away when people are locked up, right? And they can't spend money in their own economies. And so I think collaborating across sections of people to go back to that diversity and inclusive kind of thought leadership needs to be at the table when we talk about, not STEM is very important, but other things that would enhance what happens to people both in prison and when they get out of prison, because it affects society, right? And this is not sustainable, what we're doing, and we've seen some reforms in the last couple of years, but we're in danger of it swinging back the other way, because, you know, correctional policy often happens in pendulums based on what's happening in the economy and based on, you know, some other stressors. But I would just double click on the fact that we need to invite as many people to the table who may have an idea or a solution, because what we've been doing hasn't worked.
Yeah. Did you mention lawmakers?
Yes, I said policy.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd probably dive into just a little bit more on that. we need to shift from using like rhetoric that's a part of our campaigns and being elected, you know, to drive votes and speaking about like crime and safety. I feel like that's a part of everyone's spiel when they're running for office and trying to get elected. They want to drive home about how, you know, how they're going to make communities more safer, and it's almost always closely linked to like some type of harmful policy. For those who, you know, not go rogue, because that would mean that they had another direction that they were going in, but for those who take a different approach and talk about like safer policies that won't like, you know, destroy communities and families, but at the same time, maybe still hold people accountable and even better, lead toward those individuals who are involved in crime becoming better people without going to prison. Whenever someone takes that approach, the results are you know, way lower. So for me, I think, you know, again, move to this space that we're talking about in order to create this type of change. We need people that are running for office and aren't afraid to say a part of their platform, like, you know, if I get in, I'm going to expand, you know, college opportunities for people on the inside. And let me tell you why that's important. Like, who's the brave soul that's going to say that, as opposed to, you know, we want to make our community safer, so we're going to invest in like 2 more prisons in this rural area and keep, you know, fathers and mothers 30 to 50 miles away from their children. Like, who's going to be the brave ones to do that? And I would make the case that it would probably have to be system impacted people. But you'd have to have a mean fundraising campaign and strategy for us to, you know, really get into the roles in the way I think we need to in order to see that change. We do have some formerly incarcerated people in office within FICGN, and you know, I'm working on ideas to increase that across the country. But again, we're talking about the stakeholders that need to be involved. It isn't only the system impacted people, you know, just me representing formerly incarcerated people, but I should be formerly incarcerated, but also be, you know, a congressman at the same time. Like that's more impactful, because we're not just relegated to a group of people who are trying to convince others. Like, no, we actually have decision-making power. People aren't inviting me for me to share my story. They inviting me because we got a vote coming up and they're trying to get me to vote, you know, yay on that. So I think that's the type of space we need to get to if we really want to see this type of change happen without forcing people just because it's legislated.
Thank you so much.
I just want to add one thing. So I just kind of want to bring it back to a practitioner level instead of talking about laws and whatnot. So who's missing is industry. So we can prepare people in prisons for certifications, and they can walk out with certifications, but if nobody's going to hire them, then the certification is moot. And we also don't do a lot of, in corrections, we don't look at data in a smart way, right? Like, for instance, somebody mentioned welding. We have all these welding classes. How many people weld when they get out? Did we look at that data? No. I don't know that we do. One of the most impactful programs we had was the company that manufactures our tablets, APS, partnered with Amazon, who put the courses on the tablet, and then we brought people in and we put them on the internet, and we did all these things, and people got a cloud practitioner certification, which can start at 6 figures, and then is Amazon going to hire them? So the conversation is Amazon at the table. Do we teach people CNC, computerized courses? Then do we have a company waiting for them when they get out? Who's hiring? So second chance hiring, fair chance hiring, it's important, but it's most important at the correctional level where we're training people, or the post-release level where we're getting people ready for jobs, that we also help move them into that. And industry is not included in these conversations. We do all this great work, and then we brag about, we did this many certifications, and then we did that, and then people get out and they're like still working at the local restaurant because I don't know how to get a job in that. They've got to come to the table.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, would you please allow me to start my video? All right, there we go. Oh man. So I'd like to say that this was a powerful panel. In this panel, they didn't just simply critique the limitations and challenges of higher education and prison programs, but these panelists offered strategies and solutions for current directors and leaders in these spaces. Now I'd like to take time to transition into the interactive part of our session today, introduce our subject matter experts. Once I finish the intros, we will transition into questions. You will recognize some of our experts from the video we just shared with you, but I will begin questions just in case our attendees are shy or get cold feet. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and I will read it back to our experts. So let's move forward. With us today, we have my Haitian twin and good brother, Dr. Stanley Andres. He is the co-founder and the executive director of Prison to Professionals and From Prison Cells to PhDs. We have Tanaj Moody, the founder of Light to Life and deputy director of research and evaluation of Prison to Professionals / From Prison Cells to PhDs. We also have returning panelist, Dr. Amy Lopez, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Past the Edges Consulting and previous Deputy Director of DC's Department of Corrections. We also have returning panelist, Ken Oliver, who is the Executive Director of Checker Foundation. And last but not least, we have our environmental justice warrior, Dr. Raquel Pinderhughes, who is the founder and executive director of Roots of Success, an environmental literacy and job training program. And she also moonlights as a professor at San Francisco State University. So for the first question, I will play devil's advocate. So please, put away your fire and your fire and pitchforks. Just kind of stash them. But I think that this is an important question, and I would love to hear the panelist perspective on this. So we have heard the issue of low expectations come up several times during this discussion, right? But I've been in spaces that offered STEM classes to incarcerated students, and an overwhelming amount of students weren't able to perform well in these classes. What can both educators and program directors and higher education and prison programs leaders do to ensure that students are able to be successful in their STEM classes during and post incarceration?
Well, I'll take that just from the beginning. As an educator, you always find out where your students start from. So you should see where their skills are and start them from there. So always, no matter what you're offering, have baked into your curriculum a way to skill test and see where you need to start.
I'd love to chime in on that too, Chris, if it's okay. I think no matter what the industry is, it starts with working with people to believe in themselves and helping them see what's possible for themselves. Because the low expectation that I spoke of on the panel typically comes from and is birthed from the environments that we come from. especially in the inner city for Black and brown communities, when the expectation of our success and what we can do and what we can achieve is relatively low in some instances, right? And for those people that have entered into the prison system, it's usually extremely low. And I'll give you an example. I served 24 years in prison, and I would speak to a lot of Black and brown people when we taught business courses and then ask them what they wanted to do when they get out. And I didn't hear anybody say that they wanted to be in the tech space. I didn't hear anybody say they wanted to be a software engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or go break the bar or break the barrier, the expectation. Usually it was, well, I can go try to get a job on the construction site, or I can try to go get some other kind of labor job, right? And so that's what I mean by the lowered expectation, is that if we don't believe that we can break barriers, if we don't believe that we can lift our heads out of the expectation that's been put on us by the system, by our school system, by our communities, by whatever trajectory it is that has us thinking that way, then it doesn't matter what skills you try to teach, we're not going to achieve it if we can't see it and we don't believe in it for ourselves. And so I think that's where it starts, is showing what's possible and showing the light at the end of the tunnel, that you can achieve whatever you want to do. And purposes of panels like these are to show the successes of justice impacted people, of Black and brown people who are out here breaking barriers, achieving, et cetera. And I think that's one of the first conversations that we have to have with everybody that goes into any skill building program, much less STEM.
May I? I think that Ken is talking about very important issues, but I also think it's, as you had talked about also, Ken, it's very important to acknowledge that the folks that we're talking about have been failed by multiple systems. And one of those systems is the education system. And our program speaks directly to that. It is a really important question. We have to have not only bridge programs that address foundational academic literacy and professional literacy and digital literacy, but we also have the ability to integrate academic literacy into advanced courses. It's not an either or. Our program addresses issues of foundational basic literacy and also prepares people for post-secondary education at the same time. So I think there are models for how to do that, but we have to address academic literacy issues, not just issues of confidence and self-esteem. And as we do that, as we address academic literacy, we will increase people's self-esteem and confidence. I think the statistic is 70% of people adults in the incarceration system are reading at the 4th grade level. I mean, we can't ignore that. We can't pretend that we're not dealing with seriously failed systems and that we have to address those. Thank you for asking that question first. I think it's very important.
I would like to build upon everyone as well. Thank you, Juan, for having us here. And I appreciate everyone's feedback, because it got me thinking about when we were saying, the low expectations. I'm like taking notes here. And one of the things that really resonated with me, Ken, you talked about being a barrier breaker. And one of the things you also had mentioned in the previous session was about the digital divide, right? And I think when it comes to how do we make sure that students are performing well, right? Given the circumstances that they are in. And I think some of the most, things that have to be set in terms of foundations are infrastructure. And what I mean by that is when bringing in new programming that involves any kind of tech, right, is making sure that the infrastructure is built in to the programs in terms of staffing, as well as in terms of the curriculum, as well as making sure that the correctional facility and the community partnership are in communication around what is the processes to bring in new programmings that are going to require new type of equipment setup, right? And I think that's something that can be like overlooked a little bit, but I also think that can be also more tangible, right? When it comes to making sure that if you're setting up tablets, if you're setting up just basic computers, or if you're setting up virtual reality programming, right? Do you have someone who is trained within those skills and also is comfortable within those settings to come into the facilities to be able to train the correctional staff, to be able to train the teachers and the students how to use these types of programs. And I think that's where Jessica, I don't know if Jessica's on the Zoom, but I think that's where Unlocked Labs comes into play, is right? Creating that infrastructure and creating capacity building, adding on to that. And I think capacity building is really important, because how do we show whether or not these programs are positively impacting students and their success, right? And I think that needs to be a part of the conversation as well, in terms of looking at what are the programmatic outcomes that we're looking for when we are implementing these new programs that are going to require, you know, new tech setup, new equipment, et cetera. And, you know, I think the byproduct of that is going to be students not only having success in their classrooms and in their grades, but also, as Raquel had mentioned, self-esteem, increased self-confidence, right? Like those things naturally will be byproducts of that as well.
Stan, I think you had your hand up too. Did you want to say something?
Yes. Can you all hear me okay? So one, I just want to come on camera really quickly and apologize that I'm not actually stationary to join the panel. I'm in motion, as I often, maybe too often am. So I'm going to go off camera, but I'm here present and definitely want to engage in this important conversation. I wanted to just add to this question, to respond. And this is the work that P2P, really drives itself on. It's helping people reimagine their possibilities and reimagine what their capabilities and potential are, and help them realize what their true potential is. Our mission statement says that we want to help people excel beyond what society has set to be the norm for people who've been to prison. And what that really, if we unpackage that a little bit, what we're really saying is that we are at this point where for the last 400 years, white supremacy and systemic racism and colonialism has put a certain group of people at the bottom of our society, and has said that a certain group of people is only capable of certain things. So, I mean, even if we step back and move away from incarceration, the system has been in play, running the way that it was set up to be run, to set a certain group of people at the bottom. Now you add incarceration on top of that, and we've now come to this place, and also included in our mission statement is the idea that not only has society set this to be the norm, but we've come to this place where 400 years of white supremacy has embedded in the people at the bottom that they think they deserve to be at the bottom. So we have to not only change the way that's, help them understand that you don't have to be what society says you're going to be, but also you don't have to be what you've been telling yourself you're only capable of. So, we're battling against 400 years of oppression when we think about how we need to help people reimagine what their capabilities and potential are.
Well said, Stan. Thank you. I see that. He does be snapping too. Oh, oh, that was a personal message. All right, cool. So I see that we have several questions that came up in the chat. And so I'll start off with the first one on my screen, and it is, how can we improve communication centered around the need of expungement for state and federal cases?
not my area of expertise, so I'm going to pass that.
I'll jump in since we do a little bit of clean slate work at Checker in reference to expungements. I think there's a lot of great work going on across the country with clean slate initiatives. You know, New York just passed a clean slate initiative. California's passed SB 731, the broadest clean slate initiative in the country. I think if you look at organizations that are doing the work, Clean Slate Initiative out of Florida, which is Desmond and Sheena Mead's organization, are doing great work in the space. They've just been given close to $100 million to advance clean slate advocacy and education across the country. So I would encourage those who are curious about expungement programs and clean slate to reach out to the organizations that are doing that work to see how you can participate and create impact locally in your county or in your state, et cetera. I know the federal government, there's a couple of bills passing through Congress about clean slate currently right now. And it's just actually getting to the people who are actually doing the work and then finding out how we can best use some of their tactics and strategies on the local level would be my advice.
Any other takers? Great, like that is a very niche topic, and that's something that we're still attempting to figure out ourselves. But yeah, like I definitely agree with you. You know, we've had in New Jersey like several programs, you know, like that helps alleviate the financial burden that comes with attempting to expunge your record. And yeah, like in these organizations are experts in what they're doing, and they do this work kind of pro bono. And so yeah, like understanding what your local community is doing, you know, to help solve these type of issues. I think like that's the first step. And hopefully building up relationships and partnerships to implement some of their strategies in our programs, or at least give individuals the option of participating in these programs as well. You know, it's another major step that we should take. So I have another question for the panel. This is another niche and a very heavy question. And so, but you know, like I would appreciate if y'all would lend me your expertise. But in the past, we have seen the distribution of Pell Grants followed by the cancellation of these programs. What can we do to create sustainable higher education and prison programs that isn't dependent on Pell Grants? Because, you know, if these grants do go away, you know, like, do we just kind of, you know, like give up on extending these educational opportunities to people who are currently incarcerated? Or like, how can we, you know, like really combine our efforts to ensure that we are self-sustainable and that this service continues in our prison industrial complex?
I would throw out there, I think there's some state and local solutions that we can employ. Like prior to the reinstatement of Pell Grant in California, we had the BOG waivers that was allowing community colleges to come in and set up people for AA degrees in every single prison in the state of California. That's been going on for the last 12 years. I think that from a state policy level, you can encourage legislators to do things outside of Pell Grant to provide funding education for individual state prisons. I think all those are levers that we can access. So thinking outside the box about how we can create funding sources, whether that's from corporate philanthropy, private philanthropy, state legislators, policymakers, really throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the issue. I think I've seen plenty of examples across the country where people are doing that outside of the Pell Grant funding and have done it successfully. You know, Project Rebound is a great example. Underground Scholars is a great example where they're in reaching into prison at the university level. They're not waiting on Pell Grants to give them access. It's about taking us being able to take agency and not relying on people that we know historically may or may not support our endeavors.
Yeah, I see Stan had his hand up, and then after that, we'll go into Raquel. So Stan, it's on you.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure you can hear me so I don't hit like a dead spot and start talking for 5 minutes. I'm good. Okay. So yeah, I love everything that you know, Ken just mentioned, and I would just I would just add and emphasize that I think, philanthropic dollars had kind of been holding it down when Pell was gone, but there wasn't enough. So I think really there needs to be a more increase in funding from philanthropic dollars. I think the corporate world can get into the space, but really one of the big players that there's no reason that they shouldn't be in this space, that they should have ever let this long of a void go, is the university. I mean, the universities are sitting on endowments in the billions in some cases, and there's often, they offer programming, like in Baltimore City, Johns Hopkins has a program where, people with certain GPAs coming out of Baltimore City high schools get a full ride to Johns Hopkins, which is a very costly university. But universities have already created programs where they're offering, full scholarship opportunities to different groups of people. I really think there needs to be more investment by the university. Oftentimes, we're still at this place where university board members want to run these programs just so they can go to their country clubs and golf, go talk to their wealthy buddies and say oh, look at this, look how I'm helping out, this little poor kid, Jamal from the city, right? And tell this story about how they're helping somebody, but then they don't want those people on their campuses, right? So they're not really, these schools that are actually running these programs aren't really invested. They just want to say that they're doing something good when they're really not invested. And if they really want to be invested, then take some of them dollars out of that $1 billion endowment and give these opportunities then you don't have to deal with all the extra stuff that the government has to put on top of Second Chance Pell. That's a whole nother conversation of the restrictions that this really ain't a Pell for all that we currently have. But I think the university really needs to be the player that needs to step up.
Thank you. Raquel? Raquel, you're muted.
Sorry. I was going to say, of course, I agree with Ken and Stan. There are lots of places where the funding needs to come from externally, but I love this question, Chris, because Roots of Success is the only academic apprenticeship program in the United States that is led and taught completely by incarcerated individuals to their peers. And the folks who teach our courses are serving long and life sentences. And as Ken was saying, there is so much brilliance, there is so much talent, there is so much capacity behind bars, and we're not taking advantage of that by allowing people to be professors, not just tutors and legal scholars, but professors. And we have a particular way of training and preparing our teachers to be able to teach STEM courses and prepare people for post-secondary education and jobs, and it's not that difficult. So one of the places that we can find sustainable models for teaching college programs and job training programs in prisons is within the prison themselves, within the prison itself, amongst the folks who are there for long periods of time and who have a lot of time to spare often.
Just gonna add to that as well. In addition to what everyone's saying, I wholeheartedly agree. And building upon what Stan was saying as well, in terms of the university stepping up, right? I 100% agree with that. And I think just to speak on that, I think in addition to the universities, there really needs to be a collaborative approach. And what I mean by that is there needs to be more partnerships with not only universities, but with universities as well as community-based organizations, and if we're looking at, like we were talking about, the philanthropic end of that too, right? And I want to give a prime example of something that is really successful based on that, right? So P2P, as well as Light to Life, partnered with Morgan State University's Morgan Cares program, right? Morgan Cares program provides seed funding to support community campus collaborations, right? And their whole entire mission and their purpose is to strengthen community-based organizations and groups through Morgan State University to bring in different types of innovative programming, right? And one of the programs that we pitched to them to apply for this funding was our women's cohort program in partnership with Light to Life. And because of this collaborative partnership, we've been able to successfully bring in gender responsive programming, working with women who are currently incarcerated at, now we just started our cohort at Maryland Correctional Institution for Women, as well as Dorchester County Correctional Institution. And we're also working with women who are formerly incarcerated. And, you know, just that type of collaboration can have such a positive and a large impact. And I think part of that is, you know, part of that comes pitching, because some people, and I'll say even universities, don't really see the significance in these types of programs unless it's brought to them, in front of them, as well as being able to speak their language, right? And I think that comes into play. But I think overall, a big part of it is, you know, having a collaborative effort and bringing in all of those types of expertise to the table to make sure that we're bringing in the most cohesive and holistic programming and quality programming, where the funding is going to be supported outside of, you know, the Pell Grants. And I do understand, and maybe, and quote me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Pell reauthorization is starting in July. It starts July 1st. Is that right? I believe that is.
Yeah, it was initially supposed to, but there's talks that it might get pushed back, you know, but yeah, it was supposed to start in July, but we're still waiting to hear, you know, like if they're going to be able to get back on track, because, you know, other aspects of the grants have been late.
Thank you.
Okay, moving forward, a question from the chat. How can children of formerly incarcerated people be considered in this discussion? Want to just comment on that as well. When we use the word justice impacted, you know, like people often think that we're referring to people who have been incarcerated or is currently incarcerated, but the families of individuals who are directly impacted, who are currently or formerly incarcerated, are also considered justice impacted as well. You know, we know that these families suffer from just a multitude of issues, wrestle with a multitude of issues because of a lack of an income, you know, in their household, because of a lack of parenting, because of the carceral space, you know, and because of the need to allocate their personal resources to actually support that individual who's incarcerated. So yeah, like I really like this question. And I saw Raquel unmute herself, and Stan, I see your hand as well. And so we'll give it to Raquel. I just wanted to put that in perspective, you know, to help kind of elucidate, you know, like some ideas in your heads.
Well, I think that's such a great question, because one of the things that I wanted to add is that the panel spent a lot of time talking about the importance of STEM education and science education for, you know, to provide people with dignified, meaningful workforce opportunities. But it's just as important for helping children with their homework, for understanding issues of health and medicine, for thinking about what we eat, how we use energy, how we spend our money, for, you know, encouraging critical thinking and problem solving skills, encouraging creativity. So I think, you know, science education helps parents support their children. And that, I think, is one of the most important reasons. And I wanted to say this earlier, that, you know, the reason we want people to have science inquiry education is so that they can understand the world around them and of which they are a part. And that is the single most important reason. And everything else falls into place from that. But helping our children to understand the world of which they are part, and caring for them, requires scientific inquiry and understanding and critical thinking. And
Dan?
inspiring
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to say, and also expanding our children's understanding of their possibilities, getting back to the issues that Ken was talking about. You know, folks in our communities we don't understand all of the opportunities that we have, and scientific education also helps us give our children a better understanding, not only of their possibilities, but also an emphasis on how welcome and needed they are in the spaces where they have been left out.
Right. Thank you.
And I would just like to add to that, it's very well understood that, if parents have college experience, that's going to aid in, children potentially having college experience as well and getting a college degree. And then to add to the idea of STEM, to the same respect, if you see that in a parent, that could be, just add a little bit less challenge of that barrier that says, I can't do it. Well, you know somebody that's done it. But the other part that I would add in is that I think we, as like the creators and thought leaders around, programming and thinking about what needs to be done, I think oftentimes we leave out of the equation. We're all trying to figure out, like Second Chance Pell is all about getting the person who's incarcerated education. I think there needs to be intentional effort and dollars around getting the entire family, not just the children, the parents, the brothers, the sisters, because we're talking about people who have come from communities that have been deprived again for 400 plus years of different opportunities, particularly education being one of them. So even if a family has just one incarcerated person, that it's likely that whole family is undereducated, right? So we have these opportunities that are focused on just the incarcerated person. I really encourage people to think about innovative ideas on how to educate the entire family.
I would like to add to Stan as well, is being the child of a parent who was formerly incarcerated. I think one of the things that is important when we're talking about STEM is, how do we utilize STEM programming education as a way to enhance emotional and psychological well-being, right? And the reason I say this is because, as a child of a parent who was formerly incarcerated, my mom is a survivor. And growing up in North Philly, being raised in poverty, facing homelessness, as well as repeating some of the behaviors that I witnessed in my life in terms of the violence, and then me later becoming a victim and a survivor now of domestic violence, there is not enough focus on emotional as well as psychological programming that really focuses on like the mental health and the emotional well-being of people. And how do we begin to utilize this type of technology to enhance that? And the reason I say this is because at P2P and with Light to Life, at P2P's women's cohort, in partnership with Light to Life, that is what we focus on. We focus on improving women's emotional and mental health and their well-being, utilizing education, right, through different types of mediums in terms of technology. And one of the ways that we're looking at that now is through virtual reality. One of the things that I think is interesting is our criminal legal system has defined success at looking at housing and work. While housing and financial stability are incredibly important, many programs neglect the intersectionality and the care for women of color who are survivors of gender-based violence, right? And who are survivors in general, because a large percentage, over 80% of women who are incarcerated because of their survivor experience and or have been victimized during their incarceration, right? And so I say this because one of the things that we have realized through our programming and through our community partnership is women have really defined success for them in terms of their education as having looking at having their own place. So the stability, being able to help others, living free from the criminal legal system, and persevering and thriving in their mental health. And I don't think we ask enough from the people that are actually being directly impacted. What is success for them in terms of their education, in terms of their reentry journey? What does that mean for them, instead of just going off of what the studies are saying, right? And really speaking to the people that it's impacting. And I think just on that note, you know, in terms of my experience and being the child of a parent who was formerly incarcerated, when we are able to address underlying issues in terms of mental health that are impacting women as well as men, right? Then I think we are clearing the way for students and for people to be able to better learn in terms of STEM education. And I think one thing we really need to consider when we're looking at technology is how do we utilize technology to enhance that type of programming, to create pathways so that people are successful in education in terms of pursuing their career and whatever that facet is.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I
Powerful.
always feel like I'm coming from a practitioner standpoint, which I guess makes sense since I'm a practitioner, but we have I've run programs before where we had like a homework circle, and kiddos would we would get the homework and whatever, particularly in science and math, beforehand to the parents, and then work with the parents. So they had a study group with their child and could actually help their child work through their homework. And I know that seems pretty simple, but it was a way to show mom or dad were, you know, up on science and math as well and could help. And then we did do some training with our students, our incarcerated students, to be able to work with their own children. And just on the subject of incarcerated children, I was at a conference recently with HR professionals, just talking about the possibility of employers giving anybody who has a significant other who's incarcerated and they have a child, that they actually get travel stipend to go see the parent, and time off, paid leave to take their child to see their incarcerated parent. And I think that's important too, just to be able to have the time to spend on things like homework and talking about jobs and stuff, you know, that we do at home with our own children.
Thank you. Thank you. It looks like we're running against the clock right now. So what I wanted to do was and give one of our leaders, Eden, you know, an opportunity to say a couple of words, and then close out shortly afterwards. We will be going on a little bit longer for anyone, you know, who may have something that they want to say, or, you know, like is willing to stay around for a little bit longer. So yeah, with that, I would pass it to Eden. Eden.
Hi, and I have to apologize, like Stan's on the move. I'm in the middle of cooking pizza for 3 kids, so I apologize for 4 kids. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's my state of mind. Well, first I'll just say, having been at the other panel live and then hearing those aspects again and the additional contributions, it's been wonderful to be a part of this. I did want to mention just there was something Stan spoke about earlier, and it continued a little bit. I think Tanaj, you continued this regarding university participation. And I do want to say, so I am on the advisory board for my university for their prison education program. And hold on, Finn. Sorry. And one of the key avenues that got the university to start to, frankly, just provide funding for the prison education program to operate, because it had been all volunteer, was we started a class service project. And the university suddenly was like, this is an issue that matters to our alums. This is an issue that is important to our community. And in part because of that, not exclusively, but in part because of that, the university started putting increased funds behind supporting the university program. We're still not to the place where there's scholarships to come to the university or anything. It's a work in progress. But if you're alums of universities, that is, think about what your various universities pay attention to and care about, and work on that, and suddenly it will increase their interest in supporting. Is that ideal? We want them to just care, right? And do this because this is a critical thing to do. But sometimes they don't realize it's a critical thing to do until others in their community show them. So that was all I wanted to add. Thank you to everybody for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Eden. Thank you. And so I'm just going to share some final thoughts. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for joining our discussion on the return of Pell Grants. And once again, I just wanted to highlight that I dislike the concept of like this thing of second chance Pell, or this idea that we're giving people a second chance at education. Because education itself has been an exclusive industry, a privilege extended to individuals based on their race and socioeconomic upbringing. We have a history of privatizing this human need and tend to fault those who have been subjected to educational disparities for not trying hard enough or not being exceptional enough to succeed. But to be honest, we do not exist in a meritocracy. We know that being a person of color raised in a low-income community leaves you vulnerable to educational disparities and places you on track to be a victim of the prison industrial complex. So we are not giving people a second chance at education. Rather, through Pell Grants and through our higher education and prison programs, we are attempting to repair the damages of a failed educational system. And I thank and applaud everyone who's joining this fight with us, who has been fighting for years regarding this, and who are truly partnering to create a more equitable tomorrow for individuals who are directly impacted by these disparities. So with that said, like I know everybody has, responsibilities and stuff to go to, and I know that, we went a little over time, but thank you for staying for the long haul. We will be on here for like an extra 10 minutes, just in case anyone wants to speak, ask a question, figure out how to get involved or anything like that.
I'm gonna interrupt for 1 second. I want to get the closing slides up and over, just so we close those out and then we can talk through. So the next slide. Baja, were you going to close us out a little bit on Glue Up or anything?
So yes, I would definitely encourage everyone to be on Glue Up. I'm on there all the time. So I'd love to see more friendly faces and more resources and events so that our community can become stronger and closer. And the more we share together, the better we can be together. So Glue Up can be on your iPhone or on your Android. It's super easy to use. So it's like a LinkedIn for our community. So I highly recommend it. And then we have all the social platforms. So if you love to tweet, we'll tweet back. We have Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have YouTube. And Chris also hosts a phenomenal podcast that we have, as well as newsletters that the STEM Ops community puts out every quarter. So please be a part of our community. Please share all the amazing things you're doing, because we would also love to highlight you. And again, thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening.
The next slide is very important.
Oh, and Carrie will, this is very important for our research-minded folks, right? We would certainly love your feedback so that we can demonstrate the impact of these types of conversations and webinars. So please use your phones, take your phones out and take a photo of the QR code so that we can share your feedback with the community. And then I'll give it back to Chris so we can continue the conversation. And great job, Chris, tonight. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. And thank you to our illustrious panelists.
Somebody
So,
asked if there was a link to the survey, not just a QR code.
Yeah, I just put in the chat. I will be
Okay,
sending a link in
great.
an email after this meeting.
Thank you.
I see Leonard Simpson has his hand up.
Yes, and thank you.
Tanaj.
How are you, sir, and everyone?
Well,
Thank you for this opportunity to be here. We send you greetings from Wisconsin. I'm the education director for the Justice Involved Populations there for the Wisconsin Technical College System. One of the things that I'm looking to do in Wisconsin is that I hear a lot of heavy, and this is not to be negative, but there is a lot of heavy blame placed on the justice system, the educational system. Rather, in my mind, I think we have to start earlier on in the juvenile systems to start walking alongside the parents of these individuals who are likely, who are living in some of these situations to assist before this even happens. So preventative measures, assisting parents in a systematic way, a meaningful way that's going to help them raise their children. Because when we come on the back end, there's a lot of things that we have to make up for. And I think it causes, well, I'm in this situation because of your fault, you. And we have to just start at the beginning and just before the blame starts, to just assist the parents, assist the systems in understanding how important it is to help parents parent their children and walk alongside them. So that's just my comments. Thank you so much for allowing me to express that.
Thank you. And I appreciate it. What I also been able to engage in is this concept of community schools. And I think that that's like a phenomenal tactic to move forward. Where we're like actually bringing, because what we've seen is schools operate as like an enclave, like it's separated from the community, right? And they ignores the social justice issues. Like one of the people that I had the honor of interviewing on my podcast asked me what a scholar looked like. Like, does a scholar carry a gun? Is that would you still consider that person an exemplary student? Like if they got straight A's, but they carried a gun for protection. What she did was highlight the social issues that was transpiring in that community, stating that, we have children, we have teens that are walking through neighborhoods where like the color of their kicks, the color of their shirt, could put them in grave danger. And like in the schools ignoring this, we have students, like that are being stopped and frisked 3 or 4 times before they even make it inside their schools. But like the instructors don't know. They just think, oh, this person is being lazy and they're just late. Rather than sitting down with members of the community and asking them to offer insight. You have students being jailed for taking an extra carton of milk, or trying to get extra food and during their time in the cafeteria, rather than sitting down and seeing this like, hey, there might be a food disparity in that household. Like we might be dealing with a food desert. This neighborhood might be dealing with a food desert. And so I think that one of the ways we could achieve what you're speaking about, creating more stable households that allow students to be in a comfortable learning space, is by bringing the community into the schools and truly engaging as a unit and building education like that. Understanding social issues while you're building this education, understanding social need while you're building these educational systems, and informing parents on how they could participate in their kids' education as well. So yeah, like I 100% agree with you, you know, like and me and one of my good friends was speaking the other day, and we're like, wow, to get quality education and feel comfortable enough to learn, we had to be incarcerated. We shouldn't have to wait to go to prison to receive quality education.
I'm gonna add to that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chris. When you mentioned, you know, the need to understand the social issues, right? I want to focus on young women. That's more my expertise as well. And this isn't to say anything that saying that young men don't need this. But as many folks here on this call know that girls, young women, young girls, and as well as gender expansive youth within our criminal legal system have higher levels of exposure to traumatic experiences, such as abuse as well as sexual violence. And this, you know, increases them leading to having violent relationships as well as being re-victimized later, right? And one of the things that I think is really important, I'm speaking back to the mental health piece to this, is utilizing curriculum that is focusing on providing resources and prevention tools that are fostering positive foundational relationships within young people. And that's one of the things that we do at Light to Life is, you know, our mission is to educate and empower and engage communities to prevent gender-based violence. And we do that and understand that young women have to heal from trauma in order to really further be successful in what that looks like for them, right? Whether that's they take a STEM career, whether that's they go to a different certification, whatever that means for them, right? There's some healing that needs to be involved. And that's one of the things that we do is in terms of our programming when we're partnering with different high schools, as well as colleges and universities and juvenile correctional facilities. I want to also plug in P2P's Youth Scholar program that we started this year. And P2P's Youth Scholar program is focused on providing educational counseling, mentorship, as well as workforce development to young people, young men and women, supporting them in their educational goals, as well as their career goals too. And so if you're interested, Leonard, in any of that, I can put the links in there. If you have some young folks that you're working with directly in your community, I believe these are resources that could be helpful. So thank you for bringing up that question.
Thank you.
The issue of trauma came up in the chat, and of course it has to. And now we're talking about it in other ways, and mental health came up in the chat, and one of my colleagues was raising the issue of mental health. At its best, when it is done with the community front and center, education is very healing. And when it is done poorly, education can be very harmful. And so I think we're starting to talk about that. And of course, there isn't enough time. But one of the things that we didn't talk about today was the teaching approaches or the pedagogical approaches that we use in STEM. And it is important to understand that some of those approaches are harmful to the people that we are talking about and care about, and some of them can be very healing. And one of the things that we're very attentive to in our program is how we ensure that the educational experience is both liberatory and healing for the people we are working with, that it is empowering, and that it makes them feel better about themselves, that it helps them to build community, that it makes them feel supported and cared for and loved, and all of these other things at the same time at which it prepares them to build on whatever foundation they come into the classroom with, more knowledge, more skills, greater understanding, greater preparation for life and for work. So it would be wonderful to talk at another time about educational approaches in STEM that are more healing and less harmful, particularly for the folks that we've been talking about who have been left out and made to feel that they don't have a place in science and technology and engineering and math and everywhere else, actually. So that's an important next, Basha, maybe a next panel, different approaches to STEM.
Excellent suggestion.
And I wanted to hear something as well from individuals like extending STEM opportunities for our justice impacted scholars. I have a friend group, of like a lot of STEM focused people. One of my friends, close friend, I actually did a podcast with him as well. His name is Adam. He was interested in engineering. And I think he wanted to like focus primarily on like building like aircrafts and stuff like that. That was like a specialized interest, like that. I mean, like a specialized field he could have pursued with the engineering degree. But when he sat down with his instructor, who he also told was, I'm justice impacted. He told his instructor that he was justice impacted. His instructor said it's not going to happen. He's like, well, like in this field, because of the collaboration between the government agencies and the STEM field, like you're not going to have an opportunity to pursue, you're not going to get a job, period. You won't get a job in this field. And so I still encounter individuals that would have to change majors and may have to go back to school or just even start working in the field that has nothing to do with, like what they pursued their bachelor's and master's degree. And I wanted to hear, like, has there been any solutions put out to help individuals like that, like navigate through this? And I'm asking this as a personal question for like both my mentees and for my friends that are experiencing this, because I hear every once in a while somebody would be brought in as a trailblazer, but it's not normal. It's not normal at all. And so like, what can we do to like basically stop this type of discrimination against our justice impacted people? I would love to hear tactics, strategies, ideas, anything. Thank you. Going to put Basha on the spot. So what do you
can
think,
put me on the
Basha?
spot. I was about to say something. I think, Chris, it's about sharing our stories. I think someone mentioned earlier on in the conversation, people don't know until it truly impacts them directly or their loved one and whatnot. So sharing our stories and being vulnerable, even though it's difficult, right? But being front and center and having these conversations with people who may feel uncomfortable initially. I mean, it goes back to DEI, right? Like, how do you teach people to be open and inclusive? I mean, we all have conscious and unconscious bias, whether we like to say it or not, we do as human beings, but we can agree to disagree and we can share these horrendous barriers to entry that we've all experienced as justice involved people. But I feel like because of our experiences, we have to pay it forward and share our stories so that we can implement necessary change. And it's hard work. It's not overnight. It's continuous tenacity and being stubborn and remessaging and sharing these stories and also translating it into a language that will allow that person on the other end to understand, and I think that starts with language, using person-centric language, calling us people. I absolutely hate the word felon or criminal. We are justice involved people. We are mothers, we are fathers, we are brothers, we are sisters. We have family just like anyone else. And putting that into context makes it real. It puts humanity in front of people. And to the end consumer who may be like, well, I don't care. It does cost them money. It's a very expensive operation. So if we look at it from an economical perspective, we can demonstrate that too. So those are just some ideas that I have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Like, I think that, like, when we talk about like DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oh, I see your hand, Leonard. I'll get right to you after I share this thought. And we speak about how to expand the opportunities to marginalized communities. Like, we forget that, like, formerly incarcerated people are a marginalized community as well. And you're talking about 1 out of every 4 people in America, has been directly impacted by the prison industrial complex. You're talking about the United Nations have called our prison industrial complex a human rights violation. I don't understand why, there hasn't been mass legislation put forth to repair this harm. And so, just like we were able to create channels for people of color, for women, for the queer community, stating that, hey, this is a diverse group of individuals, this is a marginalized group of individuals, an oppressed group of individuals, why can't we add people who are just as impacted to that list as well? I feel
And I mean,
doing so, yeah.
Yeah, and you want people like us in these spaces where we have tenacity, we have innovation, we have creativity, we have a lens that many people who have not been in our shoes have not experienced. So we look at life through a different lens and can challenge people to think outside the box.
Yeah. Diversity is like what fuels innovation at the end of the day. But Leonard, I saw your hand up, and yeah, I wanted to give you a chance.
Well, I just wanted to let the thought lather a little bit as I wanted to respond to your question. One of the most powerful things that we have as educators or people that are in this space is student voice. And when I say student voice, everyone is a student. Anyone who attends or receives anything from our technical colleges in Wisconsin, whether you're in an institution, whether you're in a classroom, because it is a classroom, it expands to the institution. Those student voices are very powerful, and we must start to use the student voices on platforms that are in front of legislators, in front of people who can make different changes and decisions, in front of changing the minds of secured facilities, and from security to education. And we understand that security is important, but if we want to change things, we have to security has to walk alongside education and not be so much in front of, so that those barriers are removed. And that's what moves people, our people. I think Basaya, did I say your name right, Basaya?
Basha.
Basha.
It's Basha. I've been called all different names, so it's totally fine.
I'm so sorry. I think she expressed it very well. We're all just people that ended up in different situations. But the voice of a person reaches another person. What comes from the heart reaches the heart. And so this is the piece I think that we have to utilize, because it's not the instructor, it's not the education directors, it's not the people at the top that are the experts of these students' experience. It's the students themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And you see how powerful student movements can be, SNCC started their nonviolent protests before MLK did, we see, the Panthers, they started on campuses, you're talking about individuals that literally, that literally inspired initiatives that's practiced by a modern day government. you know, like the SNAP program and free breakfasts and stuff like that. It came from students, you know, like looking to improve the quality and conditions of their communities. So like, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Wholeheartedly agree. But yeah, like I see we ran past a decent amount of time. Oh my gosh, thank you all. This has been a very informative and illuminating conversation with everyone. Thank you, Vasha, for like all the work that you've done organizing this and letting me join. I really hope everybody joins Glue Up. We have, you know, we often meet, we often convene, we often have different various sessions, you know, like where we kind of discuss some of these things and also uplift organizations, you know, that are pushing initiative forward, forward to create more equitable tomorrows for us. And so, you know, we would love for everybody to join, for everybody to participate, because I really believe in the spirit of collaboration. You know, like I think that doing so, just having like a national like collaboration model is how we move forward. Because like I'm in New Jersey, you know, like, and one of my good friends, Jason Bell, you know, he's in California, and he's the director of Project Rebound, and he will like introduce like the ideas of and what they're doing, like SB 990, you know, to like make it illegal for probation and parole officers to stop justice impacted individuals from taking on educational opportunities or employment opportunities. So learning about these initiatives, this legislation, all of these things that are being passed, I'm like, yes, I want to implement them in my state. You know, like I want to bring up this conversation in my circle, because I think that's how we truly create a movement. Okay. So yeah, all right, I aired out enough. Or I ranted enough. I mean, so yeah, once again, it was a pleasure joining you all. Yeah, like, and I look forward to more conversations in the future, and I look forward to like collaborating with you all in the future as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you all.